The Crimes Ireland podcast is intended for a mature audience.
Hello everyone, once again to the Crimes Ireland podcast. This week's episode is based on the murder of Mary McClure at the hands of her husband. I'm sorry for my voice at the moment. I'm very sniffly and clogged up, so it may sound a little bunged. If you have any questions or queries about today's episode or the podcast in general, please send them to crimesireland@gmail.com. You can also use this email via PayPal to donate to the show and help keep it going. In Belfast, Northern Ireland, in June 1881, the McClure family, James, Mary, and their 18-month-old child lived at 108 Lodge Road in the city. Mary ran a small corner shop at the address and was aided in doing so by a younger girl called Ellen. She lived in the house also with the family. Mr. McClure was a mechanic in Ewart's Mill, a linen mill, and some images from around 1905 can be seen online. If you have any trouble finding them, please contact me via the podcast email and I will try and dig them out for you. The couple had been married for 3 years at the time. In and around June 1881, James had stopped going to his work and instead stayed home to drink with his wife each day. On the 28th of June, the couple had an intense argument over a paycheck, which Mrs. McClure had hidden from her husband, who wanted to cash it and purchase more alcohol. She had refused this, and they bickered, and James had asked her several times very aggressively when at around 7:30 p.m. that evening, James struck his wife. She fell through a glass door which separated the house from the shop that Mary owned. Then Mary, quote, decided she needed to clean up. Mary went upstairs and was followed by her husband, who continued to ask her for the cheque, and she refused again. James McClure had seemed to totally snap then. Pushing Mary into their bedroom, he began to beat her savagely and also punched and kicked her. James asked Mary again for the cheque, but she still did not give it up. Now, approaching her and lifting his walking stick nearby, Mr. McClure struck her with it, so brutally that it snapped. Relenting now, Mary gave him the item he wanted and called out for Ellen, asking her to get help as she herself could not move. Now fleeing the house, James ran to his sister-in-law's, who was not named, and she lived on York Street, and when he saw her, he requested she come help him with his wife. Meanwhile, back at the house, Ellen tried to gather help from neighbours, and they closed their door in her face. Finally, after trying a few doors, a Mrs. Gillespie of 110 Old Lodge came to tend to Mary's injuries. Mary pleaded with them to take her to a hospital, but this was refused by James and a doctor was called for instead. A short time later, a Dr. McMurdy, I double-checked the name, had called to the house and felt that Mary should be in a hospital immediately. The following is a summary of her injuries. Quote, one of the bones of the forearm is broken. I found that the fracture was compound and the wound was 1 inch long. The arm is also broken between the elbow and the shoulder. And quote, there was a wound of 2 inches on her head. On the left temple was a contused wound, the skin being blackened, swollen, and abrased. Her nose was swollen and blackened, an abrasion on the lower lip, on the right arm, and I found a great deal of blackness. On the right leg, there was a fracture of the larger bone, the leg being swollen and black. Then finally, quote, there was also a fracture of the bone of the right heel. The skin on the foot and calf was abrased, as was much of her arms and abdomen. As horrible as this is, I just wanted to read the summary in full to express the severity of the attack against Mary. Just after 4 p.m, as the doctor tried to move her to the hospital, Mary became so weak that she was close to collapse. She was laid then onto the shop countertop, and a few minutes later, Mary McClure was pronounced dead. The police were then called, and then after arriving, placed James McClure under arrest for the murder of his wife. Absolutely amazingly, the jury at the trial found Mr. McClure not guilty of murder, but instead guilty of manslaughter. The sentence given was 15 years penal servitude. At his sentencing, the judge told him, quote, "The jury have taken a merciful view in your case. There can be no doubt that yours was a hand that deprived the unfortunate woman of her life, of whom it is alleged she provoked you by exceeding in liquor. You deprived her of life under circumstances of certainly very great and very considerable cruelty." There was no doubt at all that the judge thought Mr. McClure had killed his wife. However, he had no doubt too that he could not state this openly in court. If found guilty of the murder, James McClure would have definitely been executed for the crime. What tears me up most about this case, apart from the attack itself, was the fact that the neighbours didn't hear Mary's screams, or some even denied to help her when Ellen knocked on their doors. That is, as long as I could make it, the story of the murder of Mary McClure by James McClure. I'm sorry that the episode was a little short, but I felt the story interesting enough to bring it to you anyway. I hope you found it interesting, and thank you for listening once again. If you have any questions or queries about this episode or the podcast in general, please send them to crimesireland@gmail.com. Also, you can use this email to donate to the show to help me keep it going. Thank you very much, and goodbye for now.